What you're about to hear isn't the sanitized version of Vietnam that made it into history textbooks. This is the raw, unfiltered reality of 5 serpent species that turned the Vietnamese jungle into a nightmare for American soldiers. Veterans who survived these encounters specifically requested this topic be covered, because while we talk about bullets and booby traps, we rarely discuss the reptilian terror that stalked every patrol, every night position, every supposedly safe moment. This isn't about Hollywood's version of jungle warfare. This is about the creatures that could kill you faster than enemy fire, that waited in your sleeping bag, that dropped from trees onto your neck, that turned every step through elephant grass into a potential death sentence. If you think you know what made Vietnam terrifying, you're about to learn what kept combat veterans awake decades after they came home. These aren't exaggerations. These aren't myths. These are documented killers that claimed American lives in ways that still haunt the men who served. Let's get into it. Between 1965 and 1973, the United States military documented over 4,000 venomous snake bites among American personnel in Vietnam. According to declassified medical reports, approximately 10 to 15% proved fatal, with dozens more resulting in amputations and permanent disability. Yet this threat remains largely absent from popular Vietnam War narratives. The reason is simple: institutional embarrassment. How do you explain to a mother in Ohio that her son didn't die fighting for freedom, but from a viper that crawled into his foxhole? Military brass preferred to categorize these as environmental casualties and move on. For the soldiers who humped through triple canopy jungle, who cleared landing zones in grass taller than a man, who established night defensive positions in terrain they couldn't see, these serpents represented a threat as real as any NVA soldier. Understanding these 5 species means understanding a dimension of Vietnam that broke men in ways combat alone couldn't achieve. The deadliest snake you'd encounter had the appearance of harmless decoration. The many-banded krait, with its distinctive black and white bands, possessed neurotoxic venom 16 times more potent than a cobra's. This 4-foot serpent killed more American soldiers than any other snake species in Vietnam. Let's break down why this was such a pervasive fear. The night hunter. According to military medical records from the 95th Evacuation Hospital, 89% of krait bites occurred between 2200 and 400 hours. The species is almost exclusively nocturnal, becoming active precisely when American units established night defensive positions. One infantry captain described in documented testimony, "We'd dig in at dusk, set up claymores, establish watch rotation. What they didn't teach us at Fort Benning was that we were setting up beds in the krait's hunting ground." The krait actively investigates heat sources. Soldiers sleeping in poncho liners attracted kraits seeking warmth. The snake would crawl inside sleeping gear with soldiers. 3 Marines from Golf Company 25 died in a single night at Fire Support Base Russell from kraits that entered their sleeping positions. The silent killer. Veterans of night operations described the krait's approach as impossibly quiet. Unlike bamboo vipers that thrashed when disturbed, or cobras that provided warning displays, the krait moved with absolute silence. A reconnaissance team leader stated in his oral history, "You'd be pulling security, scanning the tree line, and this thing would be 6 inches from your boot. No rattle, no hiss, nothing. Just death waiting." The venom mechanism made this worse. Krait neurotoxin doesn't cause immediate pain. The bite feels like a mosquito. Military medical studies indicate soldiers often didn't realize they'd been envenomated until symptoms began, 1 to 4 hours later. By then, the venom was circulating. By then, you might be 8 clicks from your firebase with no medevac until dawn. The sleep terror. After the first krait fatality in a unit, every rustle in the dark became a potential death sentence. One platoon sergeant described in a 1970 military psychiatric evaluation, "My men stopped sleeping. They'd stay awake in shifts, watching each other's sleeping areas with red lens flashlights. 3rd week of that, we had more non-combat casualties from exhaustion than from enemy contact." The sound of scales on nylon became a trigger that lasted lifetimes. Veterans describe waking up decades later, convinced they heard that specific whisper of movement, paralysis in the field. The worst-case scenario was dying from what happened after the bite. Krait venom causes progressive paralysis over 6 to 12 hours. Documented incidents include soldiers who remained conscious while losing control of their respiratory muscles. One medic's report describes treating a bite victim who could feel everything, understand everything, but couldn't breathe on his own. They handbagged him for 14 hours, waiting for evacuation. The second fear was even more immediate: the Malayan pit viper and the terror of instant devastation. If the krait represented slow death, the Malayan pit viper was Vietnam's answer to a landmine, instant devastation you never saw coming. This thick-bodied serpent, averaging 3 feet but reaching over 5 feet, possessed hemotoxic venom that literally destroyed tissue on contact. Military physicians documented over 600 pit viper envenomations during peak deployment years, with mortality rates reaching 8% despite immediate treatment. Let's break down why this was such a pervasive fear. Camouflage perfection. According to military records from jungle warfare training schools, the Malayan pit viper's brown and tan patterning made it virtually invisible against fallen leaves and forest floor debris. Point men had a saying documented in multiple oral histories: "You don't see the viper decides whether you see tomorrow." The snake's hunting strategy involved complete motionlessness, sometimes for days, waiting in high-traffic animal trails that American soldiers used as paths. One reconnaissance patrol leader stated in a documented interview, "We'd be moving through what looked like clear ground, maybe some dead leaves. Then someone would step wrong, and there'd be this strike, faster than you could process. And suddenly, your point man is down, screaming, and you've got maybe 30 minutes before his leg swells to twice normal size." The proximity problem. Declassified reports from Operation Cedar Falls detail a horrifying reality: Malayan pit vipers concentrated in areas of recent combat. The snakes were attracted to rodents that fed on food waste and blood from battlefield casualties. This meant the most dangerous ground wasn't pristine jungle, it was exactly where American units established base camps after clearing operations. Fire support base. Malayan reported 14 pit viper bites in 3 weeks during April 1971. The snakes lived in the disturbed earth of fighting positions, in discarded ammunition crates, inside abandoned NVA bunkers that Americans repurposed. A combat engineer described, "We'd clear an LZ, secure the perimeter, start building positions. Every time someone picked up a log or reached into tall grass, you held your breath. I saw 3 men bit in one afternoon, all within the defensive wire." Tissue destruction. Veterans consistently describe Malayan pit viper envenomation as the worst pain they experienced in Vietnam, worse than shrapnel, worse than burns. The venom contains enzymes that dissolve cellular structure. Medics' reports detail bite victims whose limbs turned purple, then black, with visible necrosis spreading within hours. One battalion surgeon stated in military medical journals, "We'd get a bite victim and the clock was running. If we couldn't get anti-venom into them within 90 minutes, we were looking at amputation. If we couldn't amputate within 6 hours, we were looking at death from organ failure." And we were operating in field conditions where a quick medevac was 45 minutes if weather cooperated. The hiding killer. The worst-case scenario was discovering a pit viper after darkness in contested territory, with no evacuation possible. Documented incidents from the Ia Drang Valley include a reconnaissance team that had a pit viper enter their overnight position during a thunderstorm. The bite victim couldn't be extracted until dawn because weather grounded helicopters. His teammates held him down while he screamed. He lost a leg. The third fear required you to look up, because death didn't always come from below. The white-lipped pit viper and the terror of the canopy. Vietnam's vertical dimension added psychological horror that stateside training never addressed. The white-lipped pit viper, a brilliant green arboreal species reaching 3 feet in length, turned the jungle canopy into a minefield 20-60 feet above your head. Military medical records document over 400 white-lipped pit viper strikes, with the majority occurring above waist height, on shoulders, necks, and in 2 documented cases, directly on the face. Let's break down why this was such a pervasive fear. The canopy ambush. According to declassified reports from tunnel rat operations and jungle penetration teams, white-lipped pit vipers position themselves on branches overhanging trails and streams, exactly where American soldiers needed to move. The species possesses heat-sensing pits that detect body temperature from 3 feet away. One LRRP team leader described, in documented testimony, "You're focused on the ground, scanning for punji stakes. You're watching the tree line ahead for ambush. Nobody told you to watch the branches above your head for bright green snakes that blend perfectly with jungle foliage." The strike pattern was particularly horrifying. Unlike ground snakes that struck ankles or legs, the white-lipped pit viper struck center mass and above. Declassified medical reports from the 24th Evacuation Hospital detail the complications. Venom near the heart and lungs created immediate systemic distribution. Swelling around the neck and throat compromised airways within 30 minutes. River crossings. Veterans of riverine operations describe white-lipped pit vipers as the primary threat during water movements. The species hunts fish and amphibians, concentrating near water sources. Military after-action reports from Delta Company, 247th Infantry, document a river crossing operation where 6 of 28 soldiers were struck by white-lipped pit vipers in less than 20 minutes. The snakes dropped from overhanging vegetation as soldiers waded through chest-deep water. A rifle platoon leader stated in his oral history, "You'd be crossing a stream, weapon above your head, moving slowly to avoid noise. And suddenly there's this impact on your neck, and you realize a snake just fell on you and bit you and you're in water. And you can't make noise because you're in enemy territory." The invisibility factor. What made the white-lipped pit viper psychologically devastating was its perfect camouflage. The bright green coloration becomes completely invisible against jungle foliage. Veterans consistently describe watching a tree line, seeing nothing unusual, then having someone point out a pit viper coiled 3 feet from your face. One forward observer described in a 1971 military psychological assessment, "After my first white-lipped encounter, I couldn't walk under trees anymore. I'd go around, even if it added 30 minutes to the patrol route. My CO thought I was losing it, but I'd seen what happened when those things struck." The face strike. The worst-case scenario haunted every soldier who operated in triple canopy jungle. Documented incidents from Operation Junction City include 2 soldiers who took white-lipped pit viper strikes directly to the face while establishing observation positions in trees. The venom caused immediate facial swelling so severe that both men's eyes swelled shut within 15 minutes. Both survived only because their team members initiated emergency airways with field tracheotomy, cutting open their throats so they could breathe. The fourth fear lived underground, in the one place soldiers felt momentarily safe: the bamboo viper and the horror of the fighting position. The cruelest joke of Vietnam was that the places soldiers dug for protection became their graveyards. The bamboo viper, a slender 2-3 foot species, with green and brown coloring, specialized in exactly the terrain American units fortified: bamboo thickets, dense undergrowth, and disturbed earth. Military records document over 800 bamboo viper envenomations during the war, with the majority occurring inside American defensive positions. Let's break down why this was such a pervasive fear. The position infiltrator. According to declassified reports from fire base operations across I Corps and II Corps, Bamboo vipers were discovered inside American fighting positions at rates of 2 to 3 per week during peak deployment periods. The species is attracted to rodents that infest any human habitation, meaning the longer a fire base operated, the more bamboo vipers concentrated in the area. One company commander stated in documented testimony, "We'd establish a fire base, dig fighting positions, set up overhead cover. Within 72 hours, we'd have bamboo vipers in the positions. It was like they were waiting for us to build them homes." The snake's behavior pattern created a uniquely terrifying dynamic. Bamboo vipers are aggressive when cornered. Unlike other pit vipers that flee from humans, the bamboo viper stands its ground. Military medical studies detail incidents where soldiers reached into fighting positions to retrieve equipment and were struck multiple times. The darkness amplifier. Veterans of fire base operations describe bamboo viper encounters as most common during hours of darkness, when soldiers moved through positions with minimal light. After-action reports from Fire Support Base Ripcord detail a 2-week period in 1970 where 11 soldiers were struck by bamboo vipers during night security checks. A sergeant described, "You'd be moving through your own perimeter at R200, checking lines. You'd step into a fighting position, and there'd be this strike against your boot, then burning, then you're hoping to God it didn't penetrate the leather." Your fighting position, the place military doctrine said was your safest location under fire, became a threat. Soldiers developed elaborate rituals of clearing positions with sticks before entering, shining flashlights despite orders for light discipline. The venom profile. What made bamboo viper envenomation particularly feared was the venom's dual action, homotoxic and neurotoxic components. Veterans consistently described the bite as immediately excruciating, followed by rapid swelling and progressive weakness. One medic's report from the 1st Infantry Division details treating a bamboo viper bite to a soldier's hand that swelled to the size of a football within 90 minutes, with dark purple discoloration spreading to the shoulder. Documented mortality rates from bamboo viper bites ranged from 3 to 25% with treatment, but climbed to over 20% when evacuation was delayed beyond 6 hours. The mass casualty event. The worst-case scenario materialized during monsoon season, when bamboo vipers sought dry ground inside American defensive positions. Documented incidents from Firebase Bastogne during September 1969 include a single night where 7 soldiers were struck by bamboo vipers that had concentrated in bunkers to escape flooding. 3 men died before medevac arrived. The remaining 4 required weeks of hospitalization. Soldiers refused to enter overhead cover even during rocket attacks, preferring to risk shrapnel rather than face the serpents in the darkness. The 5th fear was perhaps the most psychologically destructive, because it destroyed the belief that awareness and skill could keep you alive. The monocled cobra. The monocled cobra represented the ultimate nightmare of Vietnam, a predator that was aggressive, deadly, fast, and capable of killing at range. Reaching lengths of 4 to 5 feet, this species possessed enough neurotoxic venom in a single bite to kill 10 to 15 adult humans. Military medical records document 37 confirmed monocled cobra envenomations among U.S. personnel, with a mortality rate exceeding 40%. Let's break down why this was such a pervasive fear. The aggression factor. According to declassified reports from military herpetology studies, monocled cobras displayed territorial aggression, unlike any other Vietnamese serpent. Rather than fleeing from human contact, Cobras in defensive posture would pursue perceived threats for distances exceeding 20 meters. One platoon sergeant described in documented testimony, "We encountered a cobra on patrol, and it reared up, spread its hood, and started moving toward us. Not away, toward. We emptied half a magazine into the ground around it, trying to scare it off. It kept coming." The species' strike range compounded the threat. Military studies measured monocled cobra strikes at distances of 3 to 4 feet from coiled position, with lightning speed that made evasion nearly impossible. The venom delivery. Veterans consistently describe cobra venom's effects as the fastest acting of any Vietnamese snake. Unlike pit vipers, where symptoms developed gradually, or kraits, where onset took hours, cobra neurotoxin caused systemic effects within 15 to 30 minutes. Declassified medical reports from the 67th Evacuation Hospital detail the progression: immediate severe pain, followed by dizziness, double vision, difficulty swallowing, and progressive paralysis. A battalion surgeon stated in military medical journals, "With cobra bites, we measured survival in minutes, not hours. If we couldn't get anti-venom into them, within 60 minutes, mortality rate was over 80%. The psychological terror came from the speed of deterioration. Soldiers bit by cobras remained conscious while losing motor control, unable to speak, but aware they were dying. The spitting variant. What elevated the monocled cobra from terrible to nightmarish was the species' ability to spit venom at perceived threats. Military herpetology reports document that approximately 30% of monocled cobras encountered could project venom up to 6 feet with remarkable accuracy, targeting the eyes. Documented incidents include 12 cases of venom exposure to soldiers' eyes. One rifleman described in his oral history, "We'd set up an ambush position at first light, and I saw something move in the grass. Before I could react, I felt this burning in both eyes. Couldn't see, couldn't open my eyes. Later, I learned a cobra had spit venom at me from 4 to 5 feet away." The village proximity. The worst-case scenario involved monocled cobras in populated areas where American units operated alongside Vietnamese civilians. The species adapted well to human habitation, hunting rats around villages, rice paddies, and agricultural areas. This meant encounters happened not just in jungle patrols, but in supposedly secure areas. Firebase Marianne reported a cobra entering the battalion TOC during a command briefing in March 1971. The snake bit the communications officer before being killed. He died 45 minutes later, despite immediate treatment. If death could reach you in the command center, surrounded by armed soldiers, then nowhere was safe. What connects all 5 fears isn't the snakes themselves. It's what they represented. Unlike conventional warfare, where enemies occupied defined positions, where battles had front lines and rear areas, these serpents existed everywhere simultaneously. They turned Vietnam into a 360-degree, 24-hour threat environment, where vigilance offered no protection and awareness guaranteed nothing. The many-banded krait attacked while you slept. The Malayan pit viper waited where you walked. The white-lipped pit viper struck from above. The bamboo viper infested your defensive positions. The monocled cobra pursued you aggressively. Together, they created a threat matrix that destroyed the psychological foundations soldiers depended on for survival. Military psychiatric research conducted during and after the war identified environmental threat hypervigilance syndrome. Veterans described the inability to relax in any natural environment for decades after returning home. The sound of grass rustling triggered combat responses. Shadows on the ground became potential snakes. Sleep became difficult because darkness meant vulnerability. One psychologist's study of 200 Vietnam veterans found that 47% reported persistent fear of snakes as their primary PTSD symptom, more than combat-related nightmares. According to declassified Pentagon casualty reports, venomous snakes killed or seriously injured more American soldiers than mines in certain operational areas during 1968-1970. Yet we barely discuss this dimension of the war. We talk about the Tet Offensive, Hamburger Hill, the fall of Saigon. We don't talk about the 19-year-old from Iowa who died from a krait bite in his sleeping bag, or the point man from Georgia who lost his leg to a pit viper. These weren't aberrations. These were documented, repeated, predictable threats that killed and maimed American soldiers throughout the conflict. Declassified medical reports show over 5,000 venomous snake encounters among U.S. personnel, with hundreds of serious envenomations and dozens of deaths. The lasting impact extends beyond the soldiers who experienced these threats directly. It's visible in the trauma passed to families who couldn't understand why their returning veteran refused to go camping, couldn't walk through tall grass, panicked at the sight of any snake. It's present in the thousands of Vietnam veterans who still, 5 decades later, check their sleeping areas compulsively, who can't relax in natural settings. These weren't just soldiers facing environmental hazards. They were young men, average age 19 years old, sent into an environment where invisible killers waited in every shadow, where the defensive positions they dug became death traps, where rest meant vulnerability. They carried the weight of knowing that survival required perfect vigilance every moment of every day, and perfect vigilance is impossible to maintain. Over 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam. Millions more came home carrying psychological wounds that never fully healed. The serpents of Vietnam were part of that burden, a threat that didn't discriminate, that just waited and struck and killed. If you're a Vietnam veteran watching this, your experience with these creatures was real and valid, even if nobody acknowledged it at the time. If you have your own encounters with Vietnamese snakes, please share them in the comments. These stories need to be preserved as part of the historical record. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with anyone interested in military history that goes beyond sanitized versions of warfare. Understanding what soldiers actually faced, not just enemy combatants but the entire threat environment, is essential to honoring their service properly. Remember what was asked of these soldiers. Thank you for watching.